Hi everyone, I'm Tara.
Hi, I'm Michelle.
So welcome back to Books and Beyond with Bound Season 2, which as you guys know is our quarantine edition. This is our special Diwali episode, so happy Diwali!
Happy Diwali, guys.
So on this episode, we spoke to Tanuj Solanki, who is multi-talented. He's an editor, he's a teacher. He has written 3 books, Neon Noon, Diwali in Muzaffarnagar, and The Machine is Learning. So, we loved all 3 of these books, and especially Diwali in Muzaffarnagar, because it's Diwali. It's a collection of short stories about small town India, and it really brings to life characters that maybe you wouldn't encounter if you're living in cities. It also won the Sahitya Academy Award. And on this episode, we speak about that book and his most recent one, which is The Machine is Learning.
Yeah, and it was recently longlisted for the JCB Prize. Very well-deserved longlisting because it covers contemporary workplaces, romances like no other book in Indian fiction right now. I just loved the way he covered, artificial intelligence and the way it can actually take over our lives very soon. So in this episode, he gives us tips on, how to read like a writer, how he even navigates having such a busy schedule in his day job and writing, and what about reality really motivates him as a writer actually, because he is writing about very realistic things, and believe it or not, he actually reads 15 books at a time.
Yeah, that's crazy. I don't know how he does that, but if you want to know how he does that, how the idea for the book came to him, how his life, in a corporate job affects the way that and the themes that he writes about, tune in.
Welcome, Tanuj.
Thanks, Michelle.
Welcome, Tanuj. We're really, really excited to have you on the podcast. We have so many questions to ask you, but before we get into that, we would really like you to tell our listeners a little bit about your most recent book, The Machine is Learning, which has been published by Pan Macmillan.
Hi, thanks, Tara. It's a book that I have been working on for the last 3 years, ever since Diwali in Muzaffarnagar was published. And it's a book that I have long wanted to write, a book about work and what it means to work in the kind of, corporate culture that exists in some of the big global cities. It is set completely in Bombay, although the characters do travel to various parts in India. So that's Machine is Learning, as the title suggests. It's about machine learning and how that technology plays with people's lives.
It's interesting because the protagonist is somebody who is facilitating this machine learning that's going to render people jobless. And that's sort of the whole question or the conflict around, the book is centered. So it's really interesting because I don't think that I've seen a book like this about work before. But both Michelle and I really, really loved your collection of short stories. So if you could give our listeners a little bit of context about those as well, that would be great.
So Diwali in Muzaffarnagar, my collection of short stories, it came out in early 2018. Although the title itself mentions the name of the place, Muzaffarnagar, and I belong to that town, and more than half of the stories in the collection have some connection with Muzaffarnagar. Not that they are all set in Muzaffarnagar, and it's a collection of 8 short stories, and I wanted to probably do a lot of things with with those 8 stories. So there are different forms that I have tried out. There is a story that is a single sentence over 6-7 pages. Then there is a story in which all paragraphs are a single sentence long. So it appears like something that is told in bullet points. And then there are these very, what you call a standard sort of story with no hijinks, just the story being told very, very simply. So I'm quite happy with the way it turned out, both in terms of the critical reception and how readers are coming to it.
But coming back to your book, the most recent book, Machine is Learning, why did you pick the topic of artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so this book, in fact, is set not in the near future or even in the present. It's actually set in the near past, and it's set in a very historically pinpointed sort of location. This is 2017, 2018. when artificial intelligence or machine learning, these technologies are coming to India in a way that industry can use them. And I think it is important for fiction to address the ethical concerns of artificial intelligence. Also, and more so in India, because whatever we say of the West, despite Trump, despite Boris Johnson, politics in most of the Western countries is still, I would say, to a level where faced with the ethical dilemmas of technology. Whereas in India, or in fact, in most of the developing world, when these technologies come, you don't know how they will be implemented, how far they will go, what the consequences will be. If there can be an American novel about artificial intelligence, I think the time for writing one about India is right now also. But more so because India might not have the political awareness or the regulatory frameworks to control technology.
Yeah, and Tanuj, we really like the way you address that in the novel. I mean, our near future seems really grim. I mean, reading your book and reading, Samit Basu's book really gave us the creeps. Tara and I were discussing about surveillance, and we just have a normal conversation, and just the next day you see these ads that pop up on Facebook or Instagram that are directly related to your conversation, which is very creepy. And you have addressed that in the machine is learning as well. So we really like that, Tanuj. So that brings us to our next question. Like you have explored, reality as it is, Tanuj. Of course, you have exaggerated it, but you have like explored contemporary workplaces and even the dating world with Tinder really well. So what about reality really motivates you as a writer, Tanuj?
I mean, reality is all we see, right? We cannot see anything that is not real. We cannot experience anything that is not real. So, in that sense, we are constrained in terms of our objective experiences, at least within the real framework, right? We all experience gravity in the same way, and see colors in the same way, and so on and so forth. And it's true that you could classify the machine is learning as a realist novel. I haven't felt very actively the need to use fantastical elements or some element of science fiction in my work till now. But I am fascinated by these techniques, and these could be looked at as techniques. These could be looked at as genres, and I'm fascinated. And I'm an avid reader of such books as well. And I can't really say where I will go as a writer. But as of now, looking at the political moment we are in this country, I think so much can be done that I don't feel the need to sort of go in a different direction right now. So I think for the next 5, 6, 10 years, I'm going to remain a realist or even a social realist, so to say. I like that.
And you really bring those stories alive, especially in your short stories. I felt like I was there with the characters. You yourself are from Muzaffarnagar. You also have a corporate job. You went to IIM. So, how much of yourself is in your work?
This is probably the autobiography question, right? In a certain way. And I faced it a lot when Neon Noon came out, and there I think because I was teasing the reader into believing that this is me, I couldn't blame anyone. I was actually inviting the question. With the third book, The Machine is Learning, because I also work in insurance, just as the protagonist of that book does, I think that question has come back. Is my life the same as Saransh's? Again, the answer is no. Did I ever do a project like this? The answer is no. And I would say that I am not an auto fiction writer, in the way that, let's say, probably Meena Kandasamy is, and I love her work. In the way that probably Ben Lerner is.
Right. I personally love that genre of autofiction, and I recently read Meena Kandasamy's book, which was really fascinating. So that's where the fascination came from.
Yeah.
I was wondering that, do your close friends or family ever find themselves in your book and do they ask you about it? Like recently, my short story was published in Out of Print magazine. And my mother happened to read it and she told me, oh, people won't think this is fiction, Michelle, they might think this is you.
This brings me to Salman Rushdie's introduction to the edition of Midnight's Children. And in the introduction, he had said what happened after Midnight's Children was produced, and his parents apparently saw themselves in it and they were angry with him, and so on and so forth. I think it can at times be difficult for those around us to see semblances or resemblances of them in a writer's work, and it can lead to some misunderstandings. But I think the maturity has to be that this is after all a work of fiction. Even when you set out to write someone exactly like they are, you fail, right?
Right. And what was fascinating to me is that you're obviously a writer, but you also, as you said, you have a day job, and you're very much steeped in this corporate atmosphere as well. So how do you juggle both hats? What is your routine like?
That's a tough one for me to answer. I am never able to look back. Sometimes you should see me when I'm holding my book in my hands. Any of the books. I'm amazed that it exists. Of course, I remember when I wrote it, but I have no actual vivid moment that I can recall about writing the book. I can't tell you did I write it in the mornings or in the evenings. I just don't remember. It's not something that sticks in my mind, and that is largely, I think, because I write whenever I find some time or some hours, and I think that I have the like the material to take the story forward, and at times it just becomes impossible not to write, right? And those are the moments or the hours for me, and they can happen anytime. I've written late into the night, overnight, early in the mornings, afternoons, every possible time of day. By default, of course, most of the writing would happen during weekends because that's the big island of time that I get. For example, in this pandemic, I have hardly written anything. I have written one short story in the last 4 months. I have not progressed on any other thing, and I'm completely fine with not writing. I think people make a big deal of writing every day or etc etc. uh, I think it's fine if you're reading every day. You're devoting some time to your craft, to what you like. I think you're fine.
So, what are you reading right now, Tanuj? What is keeping you going through the pandemic?
I am reading, I don't know, 15 books probably. I'm reading this novel Mustache by S. Harish. Who, it's a Malayalam novel translated in English. I think it's going to win every prize this year. So there is a novel called The Survivors by Gurdial Singh. It's a Punjabi novel translated into English. And then there is Javier Maria's Your Face Tomorrow, Volume 3, which I'm always reading actually. I always open it at any page and just read a paragraph.
It was really interesting learning about your routine because, I also write very sporadically. I just, whenever I find time, I manage to write. But that also makes me wonder, how do you go about plotting your book, Tanuj? Because especially The Machine is Learning is clearly a, well crafted, well plotted book. So when you actually access, the book at different times of day or, not really with a routine, how does that work out for you?
Yeah, Michelle, I'm changing. I think I started publishing my first stories in around 2012, 2013, and I was a very flow writer then. I used to write 3,000 words in a single night and then want to publish them the very next morning and therefore send it out even before having a decent chance to edit. I usually had no idea what story I was telling or what story I had ended up telling, and all of this was very spontaneous, coming straight from the gut, and so on and so forth. I have in the last 7-8 years changed into someone who's a plotter, a schemer, who takes a lot of time in setting the building blocks in place, in terms of the design of a story or of a larger book or a novel. So some of my work, in fact, happens on Excel. So 6, 7, 8 years ago, I used to ridicule the idea of plot, and so silly and so stupid I was because I think plot is everything. Plots have become sort of very central to my idea of creating fiction now. I just hope I've not gone too much into the plottiness of things. I hope I'm trying to rein myself in. So I'm reading a lot of stuff that I placed or published in the early years, and trying to retain some of that part also, like of being a flow writer, of being able to write 3, 4, 5,000 words in a single night.
So, what are some of the books that you read, while you were writing Machine is Learning, to help you think about plotting?
I was watching some shows on TV. There was one show that kind of informed some decisions in the book. That's Netflix's Mindhunter, and the one trope or the one angle that I picked up from the show was that the show is about two FBI agents who are traveling across the US, and they're trying to meet serial killers, etc. But I took from it the fact that these are two men who are traveling for work, and one is young, the other is slightly older, more experienced, and therefore a bit jaded. And that stayed with me because that was the point when I was grappling with the idea that, I want to write a book about work. It has to be about machine learning, but how do I start it or how do I go about it? And Mindhunter, I remember watching this first one or two episodes, and I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is going to be two men who are traveling for work, and one is going to be a bit older. The other one is going to be the narrator and the protagonist. And that's what started me. And gave me the fillip to sort of start with the first chapter and finish it very quickly. So yeah, it's not a book that caused Machine is Learning. It's probably the show that led to it writing it.
That's very unusual. I would never have thought that would be your influence. I've watched the show too, and I really, really enjoyed the show. We found out that you started writing at 23. So, how did you come to writing? What was that journey like? And when you were growing up as a child, had you always been writing? Did you keep a diary?
I sort of grew up in an environment where money, prestige, and the general things are sort of a priority. Getting out of Muzaffarnagar and becoming something, that was always the agenda in my growing up years. But my family's understanding of it was that education is going to be the path that makes this happen. And so whatever interests I had in terms of reading in my early childhood years, they were allowed, they were inculcated. If I wanted to buy a Oliver Twist, someone would buy it for me. They would not question that, it's not a course book, it's not a curriculum book. Why are you trying to read this? And so I had these normal phases that I assume kids growing up in Delhi, Mumbai, and the bigger cities also did, which is reading Hardy Boys, which is, reading Nancy Drews while I was growing up in Muzaffarnagar. And it was only after I had reached IIM Ahmedabad, and so I felt that I could take a deep breath, like I had done what my studies could do for me. And I remember clearly that it was the third trimester in IIM Ahmedabad when I decided that I'm going to read some books now. And I used to go to the landmark store in Ahmedabad and, stay there for 4 or 5 hours and read whatever I could find. And that's when the idea, and I was also writing some poems then, really gibberish and, bad poems that I've deleted since.
I was taken back to my, childhood. I wanted to be a writer from very early on. And I used to read Goosebumps back then, Goosebumps by R.L. Stein. I remember borrowing those books from the library. And then I liked Sidney Sheldon, Nancy Drew. Tara, which were the books that you used to read in school?
Actually, it's funny because even I, when I was a kid, I think I must have started reading at around 5 years old. And I always wanted to be an author. So anybody asked me, what do you want to do? I said, I want to be an author. And then obviously I became an editor and all of those things. I don't know if I'll ever be an author. It's not something I'm exploring right now. But I read a lot of, the normal books that kids read. And it's interesting that, we all sort of have grown up on a diet of, all these Western books like Hardy Boys and Enid Blyton. And
we really liked your short stories, and we know that it won the Sahitya Academy Award. But, talking about just the form of short stories, which do you really prefer writing more? Do you prefer short stories, or is it, the long form that appeals to you? And we do know that, some stories from your collection were published online before. Like, for example, Diwali in Muzaffarnagar was published in the Caravan. So, how does that really influence the way you approach the short form?
The novel exhausts me, actually, and I get frustrated with the novel form. I've tried it twice, not very satisfied with both attempts at the form. I'm not talking about the stories in Neon Noon or the story in Machine is Learning and how readers will react to it. I think there is still something in the novel that I don't grasp completely. And part of me actually blames it on my schedule. I think the novel form requires a discipline and commitment that is probably slightly higher than what I can give given where I am in my life right now. I want now to write fatter novels.
You mean like Anna Karenina, that fat?
I don't know. I think reaching even 350, 400 pages will be an achievement for me.
So, are you working on something right now?
I was working before the pandemic, like I had finished writing what I thought was the first chapter of this big fat novel. And somehow I've not been able to write during the pandemic. I think it's the general anxiety of losing a job or possibility of losing a job, and then therefore working harder to retain the job. I think that's gotten into me over the last 3-4 months, and I haven't been able to go back to that project.
I mean, that is understandable. And especially, with the pandemic, especially the beginning, many people were saying, there's work from home, there's more time to be productive. What you said felt very personal to me because I was finding myself being much less productive or less able to create because, you have this fear in your head. So maybe you have more time, but that fear is so much more present in your head. But coming back to your process, you're also the editor of the Bombay Literary Magazine, and you have been for a long time. So I wanted to understand, how does being an editor help you when you're writing your own work?
I think if you only read very awesome fiction all the time, what you can take from it as a writer reduces over a period of time because you read two awesome books or two great books, you read the third one in close succession, and you can't be awed all the time, right? And so there is lesser and lesser that you take away from it. It is the books that make mistakes, the bad ones, so to say, that really tell you more about writing fiction, right? I think it's just a way of reading that you sort of inculcate in yourself. So that's what I like doing, and that's mostly how I have learned. Might be the case with most Indian writers, where I think we don't have a culture of MFAs, etc. I think that's a gap that Bound probably is filling, but that culture still doesn't exist, right? We don't learn writing or fiction or poetry or anything, and it's from our reading that we have to grasp techniques, themes, and even larger concerns and tell our own stories.
I love that answer because, I consider myself a professional reader because I work as an editor. And I remember when I was just starting out, I wanted to find out how does one become a better editor. And I did a couple of informational interviews with people who were nice enough to give me the time. And they just said, read more, read as widely as you can, read every sort of genre, everything that is out there. And I really like what you said about picking up the things that writers miss because it really does make you think in a different perspective. So reading critically is such a lovely skill to have. But I often find that, what's ended up happening is that whenever I read for fun, I'm applying that same lens to the book I'm reading for fun. And that sometimes does disrupt my reading process.
Yeah, same here, Tara. And sometimes I wish I can detach myself from that analytical side to just have fun.
You read for fun? I mean, I'm just curious because I'm unable to read for fun anymore.
I compartmentalize. So what I do is I literally have books which I read because I want to know more about, the style and the craft. And then I just have books which, I'm like, this is my entertainment.
So Tara, what do you read for entertainment? I'm curious actually, but I don't know.
So I read a lot of books with female protagonists mostly. And I read a lot of dystopia. So Samit Basu, The Chosen Spirits one was something that I would have read for entertainment. Then I'm reading this book about Hemingway's, one of Hemingway's wives, which is called The Paris Wife.
But I think, that does reflect a lot on our tastes as well, because I think fun is very subjective. So, Tanuj, we also know that you conduct writing workshops, and that's something that Bound really loves to do. So, I have had so much fun conducting writing classes. I mean, I learned so much from the participants. So, I wanted to ask you, Tanuj, do you really think writing can be taught? I mean, is it really helpful for students? And what has your experience been like teaching the craft?
I think details can be taught. I was quite amazed when I unlocked this in Raymond Chandler, who's a mystery writer, American mystery writer, and he has a very very simple template for sort of introducing a character. He will describe your face, your headgear or your hairdo, then your clothes, and then your footwear, right? And I was, because I put in so much effort into reading, I was able to decipher this template of his. What struck me not that was the fact that not that he used a template, the fact that he used the template again and again and again, and it took some effort to figure it out. So there are very very simple techniques that are hidden in very complex works of fiction, right? Those can always be passed if you have a teacher. What you cannot, of course, teach is sensibility. You cannot teach a certain way to look at the world, which is a fiction writer's or a poet's way of looking at the world. And it works the other way around as well. There are great craftsmen I know who have written good books of fiction, poetry, etc., but who do not look at the world with a sort of sensitivity that you would attach to a writer. Okay, I don't, because this is a very very subjective opinion. There's no point me naming anyone, but that also happens. So I think there are aspects of writing, what goes into the day to day of it, and what goes into the technique of it, how to read, and what are the hacks. I think some of the technical hacks can be taught to everyone. There remains still something mystical about it, which I think cannot be imparted. That I think, that can't be taught.
If you don't have that hunger in you to learn more, it's not going to happen, right? Because the moment the class is over, it's done, and unless you revisit the points or unless you keep reading, it won't really help. Talking about teaching, I wonder if this is something that you have come across, because I, as a female, I really doubt myself when I write male characters, honestly. So, Tara and I were talking about Jyoti, the character in your book, and we really liked the way you created her. So, was that something of a challenge? And is that something that, you have encountered students struggle with?
I don't credit male writers creating very believable female characters or vice versa. I think it's just something that has to happen. Of course, me writing a novel that is 250 pages about the experiences of, let's say, a woman who's pregnant, right? And her talking about her body experience and how it feels like to carry a baby inside her. I think that goes into the zone of appropriation. I think sometimes it is as easy as replacing all the he's with a she, and that's how you create a female character. Sometimes it's as easy as that. I was on a panel last year at the Kala Ghoda with Amrita Mahale and Keshav Guha, and this question came up there as well. And that's the answer I gave. Sometimes it's just as easy. Money, prestige, sex, these are motivations that are not very clearly, different for genders. Of course, between genders there is a power sort of equation. There is history to it. There is patriarchy, and of course, those things have to be, whenever needed, they have to play a role in your fiction, in your stories. But gender in and of itself sometimes can be very easy to handle, right? And we should not overcomplicate it also, is one of my feelings. I don't pat my back for creating Jyoti in a very good or a plausible or a believable way, and I will not kill myself if she is not very believable.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful for our listeners, Tanuj, for aspiring writers.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. So now we're going to move into a section that we call the rapid fire round, where we hope your answers will be rapid and short.
Oh God, okay. I'll try.
So, which of your three books is your favorite?
The Machine is Learning. The last one is always the favorite.
Okay, what do you hate about the writing process?
The first draft.
If any of your stories could be adapted for the screen, which would you choose and why?
Good People.
I really like that story of yours too. Yeah, that would be great on screen.
An overrated book.
I think Shubhangi Swaroop's Latitudes of Longing. I think it's very overrated.
So writing or your day job?
Writing.
Mumbai or Delhi?
Delhi.
Creativity or technical accuracy, which is more important in writing?
Technical accuracy is more important because without it, there is no evidenced creativity.
Typing or writing on paper?
Writing on paper.
Your favorite Indian contemporary authors? You can name two.
Meena Kandasamy, I think she's something else. Anjum Hassan.
Thank you so much, Tanuj, for being on this podcast. It was very insightful. I certainly learned a lot. I got a lot of insight into your process. I love finding out. It's an absolute pleasure to get inside the mind of an author to find out how it was done. And I think you gave us a lot of insight. So thank you so much for that.
Thanks for having me again.
That was really insightful, Tara. Like, writing the novel exhausts me too. And that's one reason why I haven't been able to finish any. Hopefully I will.
And that's one reason why I haven't been able to start any.
That's funny. Yeah.
But yes, on our next episode, we're speaking to Tara Kaushal, who is the author of Why Men Rape. She goes undercover and she finds out why these men commit these sort of acts. She looks at it from an academic, socio-political, anthropological point of view. And some of the insights are really, really important. I really think that everybody out there should read this book.
Definitely, the book was really thought-provoking. So I'm sure you guys will pick it up and please let us know what you think of it when you read it. As always, we are at Bound Podcasts and at Bound India on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. So until next time.